One Soul Ring.
Got it.
Yay.
Again.
Yep, me too. Got it. It's working.
Yeah.
It's working.
Gotta weave some sanctums.
You got to. Absolutely got to. Yeah, we were just kind of like, creaming our jeans about the Modern Horizons 2 spoilers before we started recording. There's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
Woo.
Do you see the blob with the ooze with Storm? Where was he?
I saw the red like ancestral recall callback. That was cool. Although they're doing that like suspend thing, it seems like they're doing a full cycle. The whole like doing something broken with a suspend card.
Yeah. Oh, no, it was a legendary creature that had Storm, which is pretty wild because like I think that's the first permanent that has Storm, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. But I did see that. That was a few days ago. Oh, they're reprinting Imperial Recruiter. Nice. Into Modern. That's great. I have to keep reminding myself, this is going into Modern.
Yeah. It's Ave? Avi? Eevee? I don't know. Progenitor Ooze. 2 green.
Eevee,
Right.
is this Pokemon? What's going
Yeah,
on?
Riley, come on. It's not my cat we're talking about.
2 green for a 2/2 legendary ooze with Storm, and it isn't legendary if it's a token, and it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each other ooze you control. It's just wild.
Whoa.
It's like Scoot Swarm wasn't enough. They had to up the ante on the oozes. That's an ooze, right? No, that's an insect. I'm sorry, everyone.
I mean, between this and that Squirrel Storm card, I just want to make like a mono green Storm deck.
Yeah, well, we just did a Storm deck on the show, one of yours like a couple of weeks ago. So just pump your brakes on that.
Hold on, Riley.
All right, everybody, welcome to the show. This is Turn One Soul Ring. I'm Kevin,
Hey, I'm Eric.
And I'm Riley.
and today on the show, we're going to explore the methods that we use to brew our decks. And after all the deck techs that we've done on the show, especially the 2 that we've done over the last couple weeks, we thought it was time to bring you behind the curtain and give you a little taste of where the real magic happens. And I have magic with an uppercase.
Lift.
Yeah. Lift. Yeah.
Lifting the veil.
Exactly. Yep. But before we get to that, Eric, how can listeners get in touch with us?
Listeners can find us over on Instagram at Turn One Soul Ring the podcast. You can contact us directly via email, turnonesoulringthepodcast@gmail.com. We throw everything up on YouTube. The best way to find us is typing in Turn One Soul Ring the podcast. And as well, we have something called a Patreon page. There's some really cool little, what are they called?
Tiers.
Oh, man. Tiers. So if you like what we're doing here with the podcast and you want to throw some support our way, go check us out over on there. Patreon.com/Turn1SoulRing.
Yeah, and I've forgotten to mention the last couple weeks that we're doing an Instagram giveaway right now. So we're giving away basically the deck, the Calamax deck that I played with in our 2020 league. I never used Calamax as the commander, but I played with a lot of the cards in real league play. So if that's important to you, go check out our Instagram page. It's in the giveaways in one of our story spotlights, so you can check that out. And then if you know how stories work, you can click where you're supposed to click and it'll take you to the original post, and you can find out how to enter. And we're doing it, we're going to give it away when we reach a certain amount of followers. All of that's in the post itself, but if you win, you can get an entire playable commander deck with sleeves and inner sleeves, because that's just the kind of players that we are, and a deck box, and we'll send it anywhere in the world. So go and check that out. Getting back to the main topic of this episode, how we brew our decks. We've broken down the process into 3 parts, and we'll be starting with part 1, naturally. We're going to start things off today by explaining how each of us begins the deck building process, or the part that I've called Inception, like the film. which is kind of a polarizing film. I love it, but
I really like it.
However you feel, great soundtrack
alright.
too. Hans Zimmer, however you feel about a movie, if Hans Zimmer did the soundtrack, you're gonna want to get that soundtrack. So we're mainly talking about how we brew commander decks today, and when it comes to that, I usually choose a commander to build around the same way I decide to get another tattoo, meaning that I see a legendary creature during spoiler season. That's the more common situation. The less common one is that I somehow come upon one from an old set and I find myself thinking about that legend over and over again. And then if I'm still thinking about it and its applications and potential builds a few weeks or in some cases a few months later, I'll begin to actually research how I may build a deck around the legend in question.
Pretty much the same story. And I do have to say, after, definitely when first getting into Magic, you don't really have a deck, right? And so I would definitely be, looking through just legendary creatures to see, what's out there. Now it's just kind of the beginning of it, because there's so many options out there, and I haven't really played this game. It's oh, look at this card, and look at this card.
It's really overwhelming.
It can be, for sure. And it's where do you start? I don't know.
Yeah, it's I don't even know what I like.
Yeah.
Yeah, and given that Commander is very much focused around that one legendary permanent in the command zone, it's a very natural progression to see the Commander as kind of the focal point of the theme that you're building, right? So, yeah, it's more often than not, that's the same kind of experience that I fall into is I start thinking about a particular legendary creature or planeswalker that can be the Commander, and it just inspires me to wanting to build that particular strategy, maybe preferably something that I haven't really done before.
Yeah, and that's a good point, is doing something that you haven't really done before. And I think too, I know something that I do at this stage is I think about the decks that I have and what those decks do, and also their color identity. And I think I have more commander decks than either of you, and that's not a point of pride for me, it's almost a point of shame. But I think that's more a representation of my inability to retire a deck rather than that I build too many decks. But going back to that inception process, I think about what the decks I already have do, and what this new deck that I'm sort of theory crafting in my head might do, and if it falls into any of the categories that my various decks already fill, it's something that I'm not as interested in. But something that used to kind of give me pause and doesn't now is, for whatever reason, I really like the security surrounding a monocolored commander deck. And I don't think we need to get into all the things that make those decks feel really good to play. But I think that if you're a player like that and you just, you like monocolored decks and everything that goes along with them, I think it can feel oh, I don't want to build too many decks that are this particular monocolor, because it sort of feels too rote. But if if they're doing something, if each deck is doing something different enough, and that's important to you, then it doesn't really matter. I have at least 4 mono blue decks, and I have no desire to take any of them apart, or am tired of piloting them. I think just if they're all doing something relatively different, then and you have, even if they do something the same and you like piloting them, you do you.
For sure. Also talking about formulating ideas, a lot of the time we have been talking about, you have this idea of this legendary planeswalker and stuff like that. Not planeswalker, creature.
It could be a planeswalker.
It could be a planeswalker. There's not many of them out there, but legendary permanent. We'll just stop there.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think it was like my second or third deck. I really liked the Eldrazi creatures, and I wanted to make some sort of like big creature Eldrazi deck, but I wanted it to be colors. So at that point, I had this idea of like, these are the cards I want to like get to in the end. How do I get there? How do I get to these big Eldrazi cards? And then it was kind of like I was forming a deck, and the idea of like what colors I kind of wanted to use. And it was like, I kind of went a different route in that way, because in this way I had the idea of the kind of deck I wanted to do. And then I kind of just chose a legendary creature after the fact that kind of like, oh, he's in the colors and he kind of does something interesting. So I'll just kind of like use this guy to go along with the deck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's like your Animar deck, like the original iteration of that deck, right?
No, actually, the original one I had was Rune of the Hidden Realm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it had green and it had blue, but it also had white for like board wraths and stuff, because Eldrazi, a lot of them have indestructible.
Of course.
So I really liked that. I really liked the Bant color combination.
Yeah.
And I chose Rune because he has like a blink effect. So if somebody tried to target one of my Eldrazi with like an exile spell, I could in response blink it till the end of turn, and it would fizzle the spell. So it's kind of like a form of protection, and that's why I really wanted to have Rune helming the deck.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great way to approach building a commander deck, but rightly or wrongly, that's the less common way of doing it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know that I've ever built a deck that way, where I've thought about a strategy or a keyword that I've wanted to build around, and I build around like that. Like, I think when it comes to deck building, I might be a little bit more basic, and I just like, I think about a legend, or a legend is like, oh, here's a new one, do something with it. And, that bounces around in my head for a while. But something that we've preached on the show is that when you build a commander deck, is that you should have things in that deck that are redundancies for the commander, that cards that can do what your commander does, maybe not as well, maybe not as efficiently, but can do what your commander does, because for sometimes it gets imprisoned in the moon, or it gets songed of the dryads, or it gets too expensive to cast from the command zone and you don't have a command beacon in your deck, and so you just can't cast it, and you need those redundancies. And so that's something that I do as a deck builder, but, building a deck around a strategy or a creature type like Eldrazi, I think is it's like a more practical way of building a deck when it comes to the fragility that our commanders often bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like, obviously commanders are consistent, right? They're always there. They're always going to be able to be played from the command zone at some point in the game, right?
Yeah,
but,
it's that eighth card in the hand, if you want to think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But speaking a little bit to Eric's point about building more around a theme instead of around a particular commander, there's a couple of decks of mine that come to mind when I was putting them together, or when I was in this kind of inception stage, where I wanted to do, say, for example, +1/+1 counter theme. I wanted to do like a Selesnya +1/+1 counter theme, and I had Miri Weatherlight Duelist as the helm of, or like at the helm of that deck. Not necessarily because she's great with +1/+1 counters, but
no, she's more of a Voltron commander, right? If you were just building her sort of, what she lends herself to best.
Yeah, like her ability makes attacking, like going wide and attacking with her, favorable, because your opponent would only be able to block with one creature when she's tapped.
Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, then she's not really a good Voltron commander. We can just nix that. It's
no, but she was not necessarily screaming +1/+1 counters, but she was a solid role player for the deck. Like, if I ever needed to pull her out of the command zone to do some work on a board that I've built up, like, she would do that. But she wasn't the first card I thought of when I thought of +1/+1 counters. All I knew is I wanted to build around that theme, and Miri seemed like a good role player to help me get an attack in if I needed to. And on a similar vein, or I guess a similar inception point, was using a Rexmemphis as a storm commander. Because like traditionally, I mean, if you look at EDH Rec, more often than not, Rexmemphis is like a, big Leviathan or like big sea creature tribal commander deck, because it mixes blue and green, so the green ramp and the big blue sea creatures. But to me, I wanted green for that ramp, of course, but I also wanted blue for the storm capabilities, using things like High Tide and Frantic Surge and Turnabout to untap the massive amounts of lands that I accumulate. And Rexmemphis being a land coming from the command zone was like the perfect role player for that kind of deck. So more often than not, if I'm playing that, I'm not interested in turning him into a 12/12. I'm interested in keeping him as a land so I can untap him with, High Tide or sorry, with Turnabout or Frantic Surge.
Yeah, I really like the because like basically with those two options you just gave there, Riley, was like I'm not building the deck around the commander. The commander is a very good support piece for the deck archetype.
Yeah.
Which is a different way of looking at your commander, but it's also a really neat way if you've been building a few commander decks and stuff like that. Trying to use your commander as like a support piece can be a different way to look at actually building a deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because for sure there can be periods of time where your commander just gets hated out of the game and your strategy falls apart. So having a new way of looking at your deck, or building your deck in a way that it can kind of function without the commander, can be really useful.
Yeah, and it's a much more practical way of deck building, and potentially more powerful way of doing it, because you're not relying on that card that is quote unquote always available, because sometimes, like I said, it's not available. So I think that sort of covers the inception point of our decks. We tried to just keep in mind that, while we're doing this, we broke this down into 3 parts, and we're just trying to keep it digestible. Of course, there is a plethora of deck building styles and stages that you go through, and all the various things that you go through, but we're just trying to, keep this relatively tight. So we're going to move on to step 2, or something that I've titled the hard part. So, this part of the deck building process, which is actually putting the list together. Once the theory crafting and thinking about it, and like you're on the can and you're trying to read a book, and you just keep coming back to that legend or that keyword or that style, and you finally decide, okay, I need to get something down on paper, or I need to get something down on Deckstats, or whatever site you use to build your decks, but I need to get this out of my head. And I called this the hard part, I think, because for me this is the hardest part. And oftentimes after I put a deck list together and I test play the deck, I have to make quite a lot of changes to it. And I think ideally, I'd get it right on the first try. And maybe I'm getting to that point, but once that new commander or keyword or strategy or creature type catches my attention, I start the real research. So I start to, I always start with a lot of keyword searches on Gatherer and Scryfall. Scryfall is great. I really have no complaints about Scryfall. Gatherer does leave a bit to be desired. It's not the most user friendly. You do have to kind of figure out how to use the advanced search engine. And it does rely on your ability to kind of know a bit about Magic cards and how they're written out. But if you have that edge, it Gatherer is very helpful. But those are that's sort of what I do when I start to actually put a deck list together. It's a lot of keyword searches.
Yeah, that's definitely a big approach.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, in the beginning, I definitely used Gatherer a lot. After Scryfall, like, Scryfall has definitely evolved over time from us playing Magic. And I feel like I'm using Scryfall most of the time now compared to actually using Gatherer.
Yeah.
And so for anyone who hasn't checked out Scryfall, I would definitely check out Scryfall.
It is the
yeah, the
best search engine for Magic cards, like hands down. It's like, Gatherer,
like,
the only time I use Gatherer is if I need to see like a rules interaction that's not showing up on Scryfall, but oftentimes they're written out on Scryfall too. So
yeah, and like Scryfall, it has a really good like UI. It's a much better interface than what Gatherer has, and so just even like I know how to use Gatherer, but just because the ease of use of Scryfall is so much better, I really really like that website.
Yeah, and you can even change it too. You can change how you see the Magic card listings, right? Like I think by default it shows you the cards just like the cards standing alone, and then when you click on the card, it brings up the page that gives you more details. But you can change it so that you see like the detailed breakdowns all on one page as well. So there's lots of things you can do to customize your Scryfall searches. Like the advanced searching features are very deep. So if you have something very specific, like specific power or specific CMC or a combination of multiple things, and you really want to narrow it down, like the searches are very good, especially given that you can filter for, like for commander players, you can filter for color identity, which is like the first thing that I would put on my filter. Like if I have a particular commander in mind, I'm going to put in the color identity so I'm not seeing anything else that is not relevant. And then you can even search up legality, right? Like make sure it's legal in Commander so you don't accidentally put a Black Lotus in your deck.
Trade secrets in your deck, yeah. That's funny that you do the color identity filter. I don't do that filter because like I like to see the cards that are like, oh, it would be great, or like a hybrid card, especially. It'd be like, oh, that would be great if they changed the hybrid mana rules, or if it wasn't a hybrid mana card, and like I could run that in my deck. I feel like the same way I feel about when they spoiled the lessons from Strixhaven, and I'd be like, oh man, I can scry 2 and draw a card in white. This is great. Like that's it's just like, whoa, that would be great if I could do that. But alas, I can't. I should have made the filters differently. I think I will going forward. It's like it's nice. It's nice to wish, but I'd rather just come back to reality.
And I mean, like doing it that way, if you haven't seen cards very often, you do get yourself a little bit more familiar with what's out there. So it's kind of an interesting, way to do that.
Yeah, and something that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, apart from that, it's a great feature of Scryfall is that if you're going through Scryfall and you look up a card, you can scroll down and you can click download art crop, and it just gives you the art frame of the card. So if you just need the card art for whatever reason, and we need it a lot for social media, you can just you can save it or you can copy it, and boom, done. Boom. It's great. So I just love that. I really have no complaints about Scryfall. It is a great free Magic service.
Yeah, and I'll tag on a little bit to that as well. Like for someone who really likes art, and like when I was making a bunch of decks and I wanted to use some different, like even basic land arts, like Scryfall is really good for looking at all of the art printings of a card. And so if you want to like really customize your deck and have like some art that you really, really like and want to have those specific arts, it's a really useful tool to see all of the different printings of a certain card and find those arts that you really, really want, and then go and be able to like purchase them and stuff from a store.
Yeah, and like I compile like a series of images for our lore episodes, and like I post them on Instagram, but like you guys see the bulk of them. But a lot of that is me just going to Scryfall, looking up that set that novel is a result of, or vice versa, whatever, and just scrolling through the set of cards on Scryfall, clicking on the card, downloading the image, and that's what I use. So even if you just want to take a little trip through Lore Town, it's great for that. If you want to look at entire sets.
Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah.
And so, I mean, getting back.
Oh. Yeah, go ahead.
Go, Riley.
What I was gonna say, like when we're when we're building decks in Scryfall, or at least when I'm using Scryfall as a tool for building decks, it's got this really nice feature where you can set up a list. So like a commander list, for example, you can set it up so that you have your deck list, and it links to your active deck list whenever you're like browsing through Scryfall. So as you're kind of searching through, if you're on your computer, you can hover over the image of a card and press A on your keyboard to add it to your deck. Or if you're on your phone or you want to do it a little bit more manually, you can actually go into the detailed section of the card, and then there's going to be a little button at the bottom that says add to deck. So I use that all the time for putting together my initial deck lists.
Wow, keyboard shortcuts. I didn't think we were going to get this deep with it, but that's pretty okay. No, I love it. I love it.
I guess you make Riley, you have a Scryfall account to do that?
I don't know if like I when Scryfall gave the option of like pledging money, like I put in $10. That was like, I don't know, a year, maybe 2 years ago. I can't remember when they started to monetize it, but yeah, it was just like a one-time donation, and
because you can make a free account though, so I'm just like, you have like an account that you sign in with Scryfall.
Yeah, I have an account. I have a supporter account, so I don't know if like the free version of Scryfall like has the same level of features. I think it does.
Yeah.
But yeah, it should be this little clipboard that pops up at the bottom left of your screen that shows you like your little clipboard, your little inventory, so to speak. It might be a little backpack. It's hard to tell what the image is.
So Riley, is that what you use primarily when you're building a deck? You do it digitally and you use Scryfall?
Oftentimes, yeah. Like if I'm using Scryfall as the tool, like if I'm not just building straight from my collection, which is another method of mine where I just like pull out my collection and start going through my piles of cards.
All the bulk.
Yeah, it's like that in itself is an experience, and a really fun one at that. Like, it's probably the cheapest way for me to brew a deck because it doesn't involve me purchasing new cards right off the bat.
Right.
So yeah, pulling out my collection and sorting through and finding a theme and building around it with the cards that I have available is definitely a fun way to approach it. But if I'm building something like particularly for the show, or if I'm exploring like a new idea and like trying to find really niche cards that I know I don't have, like Scryfall is the tool that I primarily rely on. And yeah, I'm definitely using Scryfall and the deck list in Scryfall to help build my initial deck before I get it over into Deckstats.
Mm-hmm. Oh, go ahead, Eric. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say on his point of like deck building with like your available cards. I've never done that before, and I really like the idea.
It's fun.
And I really want to try that sometime.
Yeah, you got to try it.
It's a lot of fun. It makes you feel like well, for me it makes me feel like, 9 or 10, and I'm going through all the cards that I have. Like I think it takes you back to when you started playing, or at least that's what it takes me back to, because the internet existed and card stores existed, but like this was, you'd go to the odd draft, but most of the time you're just playing on the kitchen table, or you're playing without sleeves on driveways. We did that. Yeah, that's like Stronghold Exodus era. Like I was doing that. I was watching.
I wish I was playing Magic back then.
I was watching my brothers and their friends doing that. They hadn't taught me yet. I hadn't shown enough interest, but
yeah.
But this point in the deck building process, when we actually start to put the deck together and we actually start to do research, it's important to point out that it can be the point where we might find that the legend or the strategy that we've been theory crafting around doesn't really have a lot of viability around it, as much as we might think. And sometimes that means that we have to abandon the build at that point. And I'm sure that's a situation we've all been in.
Yeah.
Or try and pivot it.
Try and pivot it. Yeah, exactly.
Two decks that come to mind for me: Elk Tribal and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh man.
Yeah. So it's and like that's just something that happens, and hopefully at this point you haven't purchased any cards. And so you just kind of, okay, this isn't really going to work. This isn't what I thought it was going to be. And you move forward, or you get a different idea, or like Eric said, you pivot. Maybe you keep the same commander, but you change the strategy, or you keep the strategy and you change the commander. That can be something that does work. And, it can be a really informative point that you come to, because maybe you realize it, you wanted to, because you have to build around a different commander to keep the strategy, then it opens up a whole other color combination. Or because you can keep the commander but change the strategy, it opens you up to a whole other strategy. So it's just something that I wanted to mention, that sometimes we have to abandon the builds, or we have to abandon all the good ideas that we thought we had at this point.
Yeah.
And it's still staying in this deck, like deck listing category, segment. I feel I should mention something that might be a little controversial, but once I kind of know what the bones of the deck are going to be, and I just use Scryfall, or not Scryfall. I do Scryfall for research, but I didn't even know you could use it to build decks. I use Deckstats to build my decks. I actually, even when we first started doing the show, before Eric informed me that Deckstats existed, I was still doing them on paper. But but I do look, like, once I get to that point, and it's sort of solidified, and I'm like, okay, this is right, this feels good, there's enough viability for this. I do look up the commander on EDHREC, and I also look up deck lists with my chosen commander at the helm, and I think it's kind of to confirm that the direction I'm going in is somewhat correct or viable. So I think for me, I'm somewhat, I'm somewhere between a net decker and something that's less reviled, maybe. And I think all of us, like, it's however you build your decks, it's fine. Just have fun building your decks, have fun piloting your decks. It's all good. But I just wanted to be perfectly honest that I do look up deck lists, just to kind of, it's sort of like confirmation bias. It's like when you do a keyword search of what you already believe in, and you're like, okay, I'm right about this.
I don't think that should be, like, to your point, like, I don't think this should be something that's frowned upon, really.
Not at all.
I do find, looking at other people's deck lists and looking at other cards, it can just be another way to, like, get ideas for your deck. Maybe there's a card, like, a lot of the times when I'm finishing up a deck, like, I always use EDHREC, because you can't find all the cards sometimes, and if you just look at different categories inside of EDHREC, just skim through things, and you're like, oh, I forgot about this card, maybe this card would work really good in this deck or something like that. Like, it's still just, it's another type of search engine that you're using to look up cards for your deck.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's generally not the first place I start. Like, I don't pull up EDHREC first. It's usually the last place I go to, because I've done it in the opposite way before, where I start with EDHREC, and then you have this deck that has all these, like, themes that are going every which direction, because it's pulling in all this data from all over the internet, of course, and showing you all these cards that people have been playing with, but they're not always from the same kind of strategy, right? They could be multiple strategies kind of crammed into one web page. But it's a perfect place to kind of end things on, because it helps you kind of see, if your theme makes sense, or it helps kind of broaden your perspective in a sense that you may have been super focused on a particular element of your theme, but totally discounted another piece that fits perfectly into that theme. If like your Scryfall searches weren't, capturing that one particular element that seems to synergize perfectly, right? So EDHREC is definitely an awesome tool to use to try to just make sure that you're on the right track, or the theme that you've gone down makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that sort of leads me into my next point, because, you know, like when I'm at that stage where, you know, I'm putting things into Deckstats and I'm really building the deck, I'm making those hard decisions where, you know, you're getting to that 100 card limit. You know, there are two things that are clear and present in my mind, and they concern each card that I add to the list. The first is, does this card help do what the deck is trying to do?
Yeah.
So you want most of the cards to fall into that category. That being said, there are often cards that don't have too much of an opportunity cost, and that can also be silver bullets against other decks. You know, cards like Crows and Grip, Chaos Warp, Scavenger Grounds, to name a few. We're not saying you should run these cards in every deck that can support the colors, but they're always something to think about. The second thing is the mana curve. Beyond a deck that lets you cast a lot of cards without paying their mana cost, on the curve on a deck like that, it's probably going to be higher. But for every other deck, I try to keep the curve as tight as possible, and I think that comes back to an enjoyment of play perspective. You know, as much as I like to win, as much as I love to win. It's not that I like to win. Winning it's not everything, but it is.
It's a large portion.
It's a large. It is. It's a large part of it for me. I really love to win. You know, you win. I hate the anticipation of, like, maybe I'm gonna win. I hate. Suspense is not my cup of tea. It's not even disappointment. It's like because the disappointment is, it's like, it's over, I didn't win. That's fine with me. It's the suspense is like, am I gonna win? That's why competitive Magic is so, like, it's like a love-hate relationship with me. But once I've won, and it's like, okay, even if it's close, so much the better. But if it's just like, I've won, it's over, we can shuffle up and play again. Maybe that's what I really like, the shuffling up and playing again. Maybe it's not so much the winning. I don't think so, though, because I really like winning. But in the absence of winning, because it can't all be dessert, of course. You know, like a big part of why I like to keep the mana curve tight and low is because even if I'm not going to win, and even if I'm not going to have a big impact on the game, or who's going to win or who's going to lose, I like to be doing things. And I think we all feel that way. You know, you like to be doing things. You know, you want to do something on turn one, ideally. It doesn't always happen, but at the very least, you want to be doing something on turn 2. I mean, if you're not doing something on turn 3, like, get out of here. Not really. I mean, we'd love to play with you, no matter who you are, but it's just like, you want to be doing things. You want to feel like your deck is doing things. You want to be tapping your cards. You want to be casting your spells. So that's why I like to keep the mana curve very tight. And so it's those two things. It's like, does this card do what the deck is trying to do? And is this, keeping the curve tight? And that's sort of, as I'm getting to the end of that process, and like getting to that 100 card plateau, and it's really like 97 cards, right? Because you have Soul Ring and Arcane Signet and your commander, so it's not really 100 cards. Just to name a few. It's those things that are clear and present in my mind.
Yeah, and I think it all kind of, like, the curve piece for me is definitely an important consideration, but it also really ties back into what the deck is trying to do, because I'm comfortable going with a higher than normal curve if I'm playing a deck that wants to slow the game down and ramp and build my board, right? But like, if I want something that's lean and it's going to take some solid game actions, then I'm gonna be concerned about the curve, and I do want to be doing things on my turns. I want to look for those little gaps and fill them in with role players, so that I'm developing my game plan in a reasonable way without having to sit there for multiple turns doing nothing.
That's why Foretold is such a great mechanic.
Yeah. So something else that just taking another route to building a deck, and what I've sometimes done a little bit more recently when building decks. The reason why I love Deckstats so much and like being able to, I always make my own categories and throw cards in there and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I can find it easier to make cuts rather than like getting to those cards up to that like threshold of like 67 playables or whatever and leaving the rest for your lands. Because if I have an idea and I'm going through it all, sometimes you don't remember all of the cards, and it's just like, if there's a card that's like, oh, this could kind of work, I'll just throw it in the deck. I'll be throwing all these cards in the deck, and sometimes I'll have like 100 cards that I end up with, and I need to cut like 30 cards, but I can see now my main idea, and I have all of these cards that I have in here, and I can be like, okay, what cards work better with themselves? And then you can slowly cut cards away that way, and you kind of have this like reformed idea because you've had all these cards that you've looked at now, and then you've gotten rid of the ones that you feel that won't work the best with it. Or it's like, I had this sub theme, and you know what? It's really just not going to work. We're going to axe these 10 cards that I had here, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's what's so great about Deckstats is the categories, because as I'm building a deck and as I'm throwing cards in there, you know, you get to a card and you're like, this doesn't fit into any of these categories. I need to make a new category. And Eric, like you said, that new category that you may have made, you know, at the whatever point in the deck building process, sometimes you got to axe it because it's not enough to add to what the, you know, what the game plan is. And yeah, like I love Deckstats as a way of getting a deck down on, you know, on paper, for lack of a better term, and just seeing it all laid out. And even and you know, this is sort of our final segment here, not our final segment, but the final part of the deck building process is the tuning. Like I love Deckstats for that part of deck building as well, because it is just laid out for you, and you can be like, okay, what can I remove here, and everything is just laid out in front of you, and it's
even like
helpful.
just even pull from like the recent Velomachus deck that I built. It's like, okay, the CMC is very high. I have too many high spells. I need to get rid of some of these, right? Like, you can kind of like just see, it gives you that information right away, and you're like, okay, I can get rid of some dragons and stuff. Like, I don't need all of these like players here. We can just have a few of the big hitters that we really need. Like,
now that the deck has been built for all intents and purposes, not that we've, you know, bought the cards or anything like that, but it's been kind of galvanized. We've got it on some kind of server, or it's on paper for you Kevin people out there. I don't do that anymore. But you know, we can take it for a spin. But as I'm sure you all know, after the first few games, you often have to make some tweaks to the deck, which brings us to the tuning the brew, or what we've titled fine-tuning segment of this episode. So, you know, when I take a deck out for a spin, a new deck, I often have to swap out a dozen or more cards to the deck. And I think that you know, the previous segment that we talked about, the deck building process, is just not my strong suit. I think I'm fine. I think I'm like a 6 out of 10. But you know, I think I often have to go back and reassess, like, does this card really do what the deck is trying to do? Am I running too many? Like, you know, something that often happens for me is that I run too few lands. That's one thing. That's the biggest problem. But the other part is that I tend to run too many silver bullets. And like, going back to what I was saying about, you know, like, if I'm not going to win, I want to have a good time. So going back to the, you know, the last segment when I was talking about, you know, wanting to win, and in the absence of that, wanting to have a good time, something that I think happens to me when I have the desire to have a good time and I want to be doing things, something that I tend to do when I'm building decks is that I tend to put too many silver bullets in. I put too many scavenger grounds in, and you can only have one, but I'll put multiples in, or I'll do things like that. I'll put like my protection categories are usually like 15 cards deep, and I need to take a closer look at the cards in my deck, and I need to realize that they don't do as much much of what the deck needs to do as these cards can do. And some cards just they don't work for the meta. And I think it kind of lends itself to Commander in a way, because we do play in these closed metas, the hosts of this show play amongst each other, but we also go out and play in the wild. And, we haven't done that for a while, but it's hard to get out of that mindset. And I don't even think it's healthy to get out of that mindset, because we're on the tail end of this pandemic. And so we're going to be getting out and playing in the wild again. And it's such an expansive format that, I feel like I'm caught somewhere in that limbo. It's like, do I run these cards that are silver bullets for all these decks, or do I just try to make my deck do what it wants to do? And I think that's something that I often have to battle with when it comes to fine tuning. But what's going on for you guys in this part of the deck building process when everything's all said and done?
I want to say, like, that's definitely a really good point. Like, I've definitely caught myself going down that hole before. And what's happening is that you want to make sure that you have answers to everything. And then what ends up happening is you're like, oh, shoot, my deck is now more reacting to what could happen compared to it doing its game plan.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to really, like, try and balance that out. You have too many options for if things go this way or if things go that way, and then you just kind of like stumble a little bit while you're playing the game, and you're like, I can't do the cool thing that I want to do.
Yeah, and it's tough to balance.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest aha moments for myself was trying to stray away from like Commander templates. Like there's a ton of templates out there that kind of give you a breakdown of, general categories that you want X amount of removal, you want X amount of ramp, you want X amount of this and that and this. But these days when I'm brewing a deck, I feel a little bit more comfortable, and it probably just comes with experience, but like I feel a little bit more comfortable with straying from those templates and allowing myself to lean more into the strategy that I want to lean into, and making sure that I have enough consistency and redundancy in the deck so that my game plan that I've come to the table with is going to work, right? Because otherwise, like if you come to the table with too much interaction or too many silver bullets, like you're just playing some sort of mid-range deck. And like if you're concerned about having too many too many mono green decks or too many mono blue decks or too many token decks or too many of this and that, it's like, well, you can have too many mid-range decks too, right?
Yeah.
So
totally.
Don't be afraid to like try a different strategy or try approaching Commander in a way that you haven't quite approached it before and seeing how it works, because like sometimes having the most proactive strategy at the table can reward you the greatest, because you're not having to worry about what other people are doing. You're just doing the best thing you can at the time.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think that really outlines how most Commander games go, because we're, as an example, the league we just wrapped up, and I was piloting the Halden and Paco teamer deck, and multiple times opponents were saying like, can't we just remove Paco from the board? And how many times did Paco get spot removed from the board? So it's just like, my point being is, you're doing this thing, and how often we're always afraid of that counterspell. We're always afraid of that chaos warp. We're always afraid of that piece of removal or disruption that's going to mess up what we're trying to do. But how often does that actually happen? And, it doesn't happen that often. Sometimes it does, and it feels bad, but, it really doesn't happen as often as we're afraid of it happening. So I think it's important to kind of bring that fear and anxiety and that confidence in our decks, and the deck that we built, into balance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because even if you have like those answers in the deck, who knows if you're going to draw them, right? And that can totally happen a lot of the time. And it's just like, oh, I don't need protection because my opponents didn't draw the answer this time.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah.
So, that's a very brief explanation of sort of how each of us approaches deck building. Of course, there's far more nuances, and I don't know, maybe we should do like some kind of like live stream or YouTube video of building decks. Ooh, we could have a race.
A race.
Well, the real winner would be
half hour to build a deck.
We'd have to actually pilot the deck and then see who is the most successful, but that has its own set of variables. But yeah, that was just a very brief explanation of how each of us approaches deck building. But we wanted to wrap things up today with why we brew. So we've predominantly been talking about brewing commander decks, and the reason for that is that unlike other formats like standard or modern or other constructed formats, commander or EDH really allows us to express ourselves, express our how we play, the mechanics that we like to play around. And of course you can bring your homebrew or off meta deck to a Thursday night modern, and sometimes you'll do okay. And the same is true for standard and other constructed formats. But with those formats, there does exist a solidified metagame, and if you want to consistently do well, it serves you to build a deck that exists in those metas and to pilot that deck. And that does give you a little bit of expression. You do get to choose, but you're still working in those confines. And so all that being said, we know that there are objectively more powerful commanders that can be built around in more competitive ways. And, as Magic players that have been playing Commander for a number of years, we do know the pitfalls of playing a CEDH deck in a casual pod that cannot go well for the CEDH player. They are, they are the same format. They do have the same ban list, but they are very, very, very different. But, because Commander is a multiplayer format, you can join a pod of 4 with your precon against 3 players with pretty tuned decks. And I'm not saying CEDH, but tuned decks. And you can still have fun, and you can even win. And I think that's because the format is so expansive, and it allows us to build janky homebrews that are fun to play and can win games. And I think a great example of that is Riley, your Halar the Firefletcher deck.
Yeah, the limited tribal, limited draft.
Yeah, limited
tribal.
He's an uncommander.
Halar is awesome. It's like everything I want in Commander. It's a janky mechanic that just manages to work because like Halar is just a strong role player in itself. Yeah, it's I think like when it comes to why I brew, it's just another deep element of the game that I love so much. It's the opportunity to kind of explore new territories that I hadn't really considered before, or take an approach on Magic that I hadn't really considered before, and seeing how well it plays. So it's very exploratory, and it's always fun to kind of look at this game that I've been playing for so many years in a new light, just through building a new deck.
And I think like to someone who's only played like constructed formats and trying to brew in there, and having that constraint and just being like, there is still that like top meta that is always going to be there that you have to consider. if you like build your first commander deck, you can kind of feel like a sort of like freedom as well, just for what the format offers and how it all resolves around like everything that Magic has to offer, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, and it's almost like it's it, you know, like the commander meta is kind of an oxymoron, you know, and I think that
Yeah.
I think that like, you know, a format like Brawl, I think gives players that are just getting into Magic and maybe only in the digital realm, I think that Brawl gives them a taste of the freedom that Commander offers, because, you know, they're like, of course, again, it is only standard legal cards allowed in Brawl, but it is pretty expansive. Like, since I started playing Arena a couple months ago, maybe a month ago, I've built a few Brawl decks, and, you know, there is some very meta decks and some not so much, and I feel like they have all done equally well. So you know, I think that, you know, players that are getting into Magic for the first time in that digital realm, I hope anyway that Brawl gives them that pushed into, you know, Commander, which lets you play with almost every card that's ever been released.
Yeah, and Singleton is the best way to go, honestly.
Oh,
It's
on,
like
on
that
Arena as a new player, absolutely.
Well, even so, like in Commander, like Singleton, and I'm thinking of Canadian Highlander as well. It's like Singleton adds so much variety to the game that, you know, you're gonna have a new experience every time, even if it's just like a minor shift. You could play the same 4 decks like 20 times and have new experiences, right?
Yeah,
It's not overly consistent, of course. You know, as cards get printed and more mechanics or elements of cards, you know, get functional reprints, like things become a little bit more consistent.
homogenized. Yeah.
But even then, there's still a lot of variety in a 100-card Singleton format.
Yeah, and like going back to you know, talking about putting the deck list together and talking about, you know, building around a mechanic or a strategy and choosing the commander afterward, that lends itself a lot more to the Canadian Highlander type of play in terms of variance than choosing a commander to build around. Because in, like, I like, you know, like Riley and I, at least I've only played Canadian Highlander against Riley, but like I love the format because it's like Commander, but you have that variance because you don't have a commander, and it's all singleton. So it's just there's something about that variance, and, you know, you're relying on 100-card singleton deck to perform for you. It just, I don't know, it's like the best way to gamble.
I think for those who are like interested in taking a new approach to commander building, like Canadian Highlander is definitely one of my biggest inspirations for like refining a new way of approaching commander deck building. And that's definitely where that building around a theme or synergy kind of comes from, is like thinking about Canadian Highlander and thinking about how building a Canlander deck works is a lot different than a traditional commander deck where you're focused around a single creature or a single theme in your command zone. And you're looking for redundancies and ways to make your deck play consistently, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, getting back to the why we brew topic here, you know, in putting this outline together for this episode, I realized that, you know, the part that I enjoy most about brewing is the tuning. You know, you know, because I don't feel like I'm the most skilled at actually like putting a deck list together and be like, yeah, this shit is tight. But it's the post deck building work that never really ends. You know, when you think about it, new cards are always getting released, and you're always looking at them and wondering whether or not they'll work in this deck or that deck. And it kind of makes them feel like a living thing, and it grows and changes, and we grow and change with them. Like for example, I wasn't half as good at cutting and adding cards to my decks, just 2 or 3 years ago as I am now. And, I think my decks and myself as a player are better for it.
Yeah, I haven't, just speaking of like tuning a deck and how kind of fun that is, I haven't tuned a Commander deck in a while just because we haven't been able to play Commander. But recently, I love like Death Shadow in Modern, and since the card was added into Historic
yeah.
last March, I've just been playing that on Arena in Historic, and like Grixis Death Shadow is not the best in Historic, but I love those colors, and I'm just jamming it anyways, and just playing, and just like being able to shift as the meta goes, and like being able to switch out cards and stuff like this. It is a really fun, just like, this is the kind of deck that I love. I'm gonna play this deck and really fine tune it so that it can play like the best that it can play.
Yeah, exactly. And like that's a really great point, because I feel like the decks that or the archetypes or the commanders that we love to play, and we haven't been able to pilot them. Like, there are decks, I'm sure each of us hosting the show right now are in the boat where like there are multiple decks that we haven't piloted since these restrictions, since they closed local game stores, like in more than a year. There are decks that I haven't piloted, but I've still tuned them, and it sort of keeps the decks alive. It sort of keeps them tuned in my mind. It keeps them fresh in my memory. And so, like that part of it is really important. And I think like once you kind of stop tuning a deck, not that you've gotten it to a point where it's perfect, because I don't think that's a reality, but once you kind of don't care anymore about piloting about tuning a deck, I think that's a good sign that you can probably retire it and strip it for parts. But I think the tuning aspect of decks, and not just Commander, because I have decks in multiple other formats that I keep tabs on, and like this show is a great driver behind keeping tabs on new cards. I've never paid attention more to spoiler season in the last 2 years than I have now. But yeah, like I think that's such a, it's like that never ending project. And in case you guys didn't know, I'm kind of a projects guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Speaking of just like tuning up decks, like a little funny thing for myself, I have a stack of like, it's on my desk here, of about maybe 30 to 40 Commander cards that I want to put into other decks, and I just know that stack is for my Commander decks, and I will
right, you got to get to it. Yeah, you got to get to it.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, you just I know, like, and a new set will get released, and I'll have like a list of cards that I've researched, and I'm like, okay, I think this is gonna work into this deck, and like it takes a whole afternoon to slot like the half a dozen resculpts that I ordered into my blue Commander decks, and it's just like, oh my god, it's a whole thing. So yeah, it's like, of course, like we all have piles.
Yeah, it's honestly, when it comes to tuning, like, some of my decks have lived and died by playtesting, right? Like whether in person, like if I don't have a good experience with it, like it might be on the chopping block. But if other people don't have a good experience with the deck too, like that's when I really take a critical look at the deck and try to understand like what's going on there. Why are people not enjoying that play experience? Like, is it too oppressive? Is it too like one-sided? Like, am I playing solitaire at the table? Like,
why are you playing so many Winter Orb effects? Come on.
Yeah. Like, I'm not a big fan of stacks, but I definitely.
Oh, I know you are.
I definitely I definitely like combo and storm from time to time. So I try not to overdo it because I know that can, not be a terribly fun experience for folks, but it's fun to have a lot of game action sometimes,
Yeah, and like both you guys both Eric and Riley lend themselves to a lot of game actions, and I'm not saying that I don't. I just think that you guys sort of are more in that camp. But both of you are, I would consider, fast players. So like it's never been an issue for me because you're both like quick like cats. So it's just like you get in there, you do your thing, and then boom, I won. So it's like that's fine for me. But Riley, that's a really good point about the is this taking a more critical look at a deck based on how your opponents seemingly reacted to it or what their experience was playing against it. And I know that that's something I think that's been kind of the biggest driving force for me behind dismantling decks, because a big part of the reason why I have, like 24 plus commander decks is because like I don't often dismantle decks because they're, fun to play and I keep upgrading them or I keep, tuning them. But some decks are just like, my opponents aren't having fun. And like, it's like, as much as I like to win, I feel like if my opponents don't win in like the social contract that we're all involved in, then like, I just plain lose. So yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. Cause it's just not, you don't want to be the fun police. Oh boy.
Yeah, like just as like a little like funny anecdote, you're like, oh, I really like wrath effects. Put them all in the deck. I don't need a way to win. And then so everyone at the table is like, are you? There's nothing on the board this whole time.
Yeah, that's a
a
mistake. Not
Like,
not having a win, not having a win condition. I think that is a categorical mistake. Maybe a hot take,
Yeah.
but I'm taking it.
Well, everybody has to do it once to learn like why those strategies are not fondly thought of,
Yeah, for
like,
sure.
I'm thinking of discard. Like I built a mono black discard deck that was built around, making sure my opponents didn't have a hand. And I think I played 1 or maybe 2 games with it before I took it apart, because I was just like, okay, well, this clearly is not fun. People are just grumpy.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting there laughing maniacally and people are sitting there not having fun. So something's going on there.
Yeah, that strategy definitely lends itself more to the digital realm, because you don't have to feel the seething energy coming off of human beings that you're sitting next to.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I do have a couple brawl decks that are built around discard.
Oh yeah, no, I've got a Turgrid deck. I've got it.
Got a Liliana. There's that Liliana deck that makes each person discard. So that was fun.
Yeah, that's a good one too. Yeah. So I think we can wrap things up. What do you guys think?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
Good talk.
So we're gonna bring this episode to a close. We'd love to hear any brewing tips you have in the comment section below, or in our Instagram DMs, or in any of the various ways Eric outlined at the top of the episode in terms of getting in touch with us. There's a few of them. We're going to be back next week with part 1 of our Modern Horizons 2 set review, Electric Boogaloo. And until then, just take it easy out there. And as always, thank you for listening.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
See you
Love
around.
having you here to listen around. Bye
now.
Bye.
Guys, I'm going to be late to dinner, but I'll bring a food token. It's okay.
Turn 1 Soul Ring.
Just on a laptop.
Oh, sorry. Aber's getting into some IKEA bags. Come on. What are you doing? Why are you like this?
Look what you made me do.